Hey everybody, welcome back to Red Mug Music. I'm Brian, and today we're going to talk about the Beatles. Now, this is something I've been working on all week. Actually, this is a project that I came up with probably over a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago. And what it is I was imagining what it would be like if the Beatles hadn't broken up in 1970. They broke up in April of 1970, and all four of them went on to have solo careers starting in 1970. They actually released albums then. So I was going through a bunch of old CDs and I found a CD. Actually, I should have brought it up here. I found a CD that said, "What If?" And I knew exactly what that was. That was years ago when I had the idea that maybe if they had released another album, this is what it would have sounded like. And so I went through the four Beatles solo albums, their first full-length solo attempts in 1970, and I pulled out some songs that I thought would be on the actual Beatles record if they would have made one. Now, I'm not sure if this is an original idea. I really doubt it is because it's too cool of an idea for me to come up with it, but I still did it. I still went through with it, and I created a playlist, and I wanted to share that with you today. I've been creating this list all week. Now, I went back and listened to the CD that I made like 15 years ago, and it was similar, but it was a little different. So apparently my tastes have changed, or I've gotten a better understanding of which songs on the albums would be a little bit more popular. So what I did is I went back and I listened to all the solo albums that each of the Beatles did in 1970, basically the first solo release after the breakup. And the first one was Paul McCartney, and that record title was called McCartney. Now, if you ever have heard it, it sounds like a bunch of junk. It's just a bunch of demos or just Paul McCartney having some fun. He actually recorded a majority of those songs at home and on a 4-track recorder, and they sound like he, recorded it at home. No, it's not bad, but it's not good. But all the instruments were played by Paul McCartney, and all the vocals were by Paul McCartney, and his wife, Linda McCartney, sang backup, and that was pretty much it. When it released in 1970, it was highly criticized for being well under produced, and it just sounded unfinished. But there were a few songs on there that were actually pretty good, and and those are the ones that made it to my album today. Now, then you have John Lennon. His first full-length solo attempt was called John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. Now, this album to me was very emotional. It was very raw. Felt like it was really just therapy for John, but he produced a really good album. You had people like Ringo Starr. He played drums on it, and he had Billy Preston. He was kind of considered a fifth Beatle back during the Let It Be album. And he played keyboards, organ, and so he made an appearance on an album as well. And so there was definitely not a shortage of songs to pick from to go on this album. Then George Harrison. Now, a lot of people think that George Harrison's album, All Things Must Pass, was probably the best of all four of the Beatles, and I would almost agree. It was a 3-record album. It was released in 1970 as well, and it was very highly praised. It was very produced material, and it was actually nominated for Album of the Year. It did really well and had a lot of commercial success. Ringo played drums on this album as well, along with Eric Clapton, Gary Wright, and Billy Preston once again. So there was many songs to choose from to come off of this album, no problem. Now we get to Ringo Starr. Now, I own, as you see, the McCartney album, and I have the Plastic Ono Band album somewhere, and I couldn't find it. before shooting the video, and I'd like to find it. It's got to be down here somewhere. I'd like to own the George Harrison, but whenever shopping for albums, I never come across it, so I don't have it. But whenever I do see it, I'm going to get it. Now, the Ringo Starr album, I don't want it. I don't like it. And I almost didn't include any songs from that album on this project because he is playing drums on John Lennon's album and he is playing drums on George Harrison's album. So I thought, good enough. But I finally came up with one song from the album Sentimental Journey, which came out in 1970 as well. I listened to that album first, and then I listened to that one first and thought, there's no way. It was this very big band, very swing, very jazz, and it just didn't sound right to me. So I was like, oh, I'm saved. There's a second album that was released by Ringo Starr in 1970. I'm going to check this out. And I did. And a lot of it was country. And Ringo Starr is not a stranger to singing country songs. He's like act naturally. It's normal. So if you were to hear Ringo Starr sing a country song on a Beatles record, you wouldn't think anything of it. It would be normal. But, and I can't remember the name of the album, Buku of Blues. It was bad. I mean, it's just really bad. Now, that's just my opinion. But I bet I share that opinion with a lot of people. So I went back to Sentimental Journey and I listened to that album again and I finally came up with a song. So we're good there. So all the Beatles are represented in vocals on this album that I created. Now, what I did is I pulled out, and I've got it right here in front of me. It's I found 11 songs. It's 42 minutes long. I wanted to use my normal idea for what an album should sound like to create this album. I didn't want to be too robust, too fluffy, too big, unlistenable, because I want to listen to this album. And I ended up picking 4 songs from George Harrison, and I got 1, 2, 3 from Paul McCartney, 1, 2, 3 from John Lennon, and 1 from Ringo Starr. So what I did is, and again, to understand, I kind of treated this like a reconstruction album, but I was taking 4 albums and reconstructing it into one. So again, I'm trying to find a really good leadoff song. I'm listening to it, listening to the end, trying to find which song next it's going to blend into, and it's going to give it a good flow. But I thought a really good start of this album was George Harrison's "What Is Life." It's a really good start. And then I followed that up with "Every Night" by Paul McCartney. And then the third song, now also understand that I treated this like an album, because in 1970 it would have come out on a record, right? So there would have been a side A and a side B. So this is side A that we're talking about now. What Is Life, George Harrison, Every Night, Paul McCartney. And actually, I'm just now thinking, I think there's only one other Beatle record that started with George Harrison, and that was the song Taxman on the album Revolver. So this would be only the second time, if this were true, this would only be the second time that would happen. So I thought that would be cool to let him start off. Anyway, What Is Life, Every Night. The next song, I wanted to put a John Lennon song in there, and I threw in God. Now, I didn't have this song in this album for the longest time this week, and actually I just put that in today. It's like I didn't want to be too controversial because I didn't think the Beatles would have been. But then, this is all make-believe anyway. So let's just go with the song that I think everybody knows. And it's got a really good sound. So I went ahead and threw God in there. And then after that, I went back to George Harrison with My Sweet Lord. And so you have John Lennon on one side of religion, and you have George Harrison on the other. So it was kind of nice to follow it up. Anyway, and then the last song that would be on the first side of the record is that Ringo Starr, Bye Bye Blackbird. Now, the whole album was, the musicians were George Martin Orchestra. So you can probably get an idea of what it sounded like if you've never heard the album. It was really hard to find something that sounded like it could be on a Beatles record. And this is really the closest I got. Now, if you have, if you want to listen to Sentimental Journey, the album, the first album, the solo album by Ringo Starr, and maybe come up with a better idea, comment down below and let me know, because this is the best I could do, and it's actually okay. So, but anyway, side A, What is Life, Every Night, God, My Sweet Lord, and Bye Bye Blackbird, which I like that name because of the previous song by Paul McCartney, Blackbird. Then I take the record off, flip it over, side B. The first song on that side, I wanted to have a kind of like a beginning type song also. And Mother off of Plastic Ono Band is perfect. It's got a slow start, you know, you got the bell ringing, and then it just goes into pure emotion, and just I swear this whole album was just a way for John Lennon to just get everything out that's been pent up. If you listen to it, it's so raw and it's so emotional, and he's just letting it all go. It's a really good album, but be ready to listen to it. I don't think you can just put it on in the background. You need to pay attention from beginning to end. It's good. It's a really good album. So I started side B with Mother, and then the second song is Maybe I'm Amazed, which is the masterpiece from Paul McCartney. And I'm not sure how that song even got on his solo record, because really none of the other ones sound like this. That's very polished, very finished song. But I know he didn't do all of his songs at home. I think he did some, maybe a couple in the studio, and I'm sure this was one of them. But anyway, Mother, Maybe I'm Amazed. Then number 3, Let It Down by George Harrison, another really good song. George Harrison hit it out of the park with his solo effort. He did such a great job. Then after that, Working Class Hero by John Lennon again, another favorite. It had to be on this record. And then the third one that I found from Paul McCartney that was listenable enough or polished or finished enough to be on this was Junk. I did think maybe Teddy Bear would be a good option, but then I decided against it and went with Junk instead. And then I rounded out side 2 and the finale for the album, All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. I thought that was an appropriate song to finish it up with. So there you have it. Now what you could do, you could create a playlist if you subscribe to Apple Music or Spotify or Amazon Music. You can create a playlist, and I'll list for you the songs in the order that I think is the best to create this What If album. And you can enjoy it yourself, because I've been listening to it ever since I created it, and I love it. It's actually fantastic. It's kind of a greatest hits album of the first solo attempts from all 4 Beatles, and it's great. Anyway, I appreciate you hanging out with me today. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you can, subscribe to my channel so I can try to grow the channel, and like the video. And you ring that bell every time I put out a new video on Sundays. You'll be the first to know. So until next Sunday, I'll see you later.